Hello. Welcome again to the episode in the Let People Prosper series. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to have on someone who is on the front lines to think about tech, think about social media, think about parents and the roles of government that intertwine with all of these. And it's none other than Taylor Barkley. Taylor, welcome to Let People Prosper show.
Thanks for having me on, Vance. I've been a big fan. It's an honor.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to have you on the program. Been following your work for a long time. I was on your podcast a while back. Radical Optimism, and people should go check that out wherever they get their podcast. And it was a great discussion. So thank you for that opportunity. I was like, hey, we need to talk about some other stuff too.
I'm excited. I'm excited. This will be fun.
Good. It will. Well, for the audience, let me go ahead and we're recording this on August 24, 2023. So if anything comes up between now and this is being released, but we have a lot of things we want to talk about to get this information out whenever this is released. But for the audience, let me go ahead and give them your bio, and then we'll jump right into it. So Taylor Barkley is the Director of Technology and Innovation at the Center for Growth and Opportunity, where he manages the research agenda, strategy, and represents the technology and innovation portfolio. His primary research and expertise are at the intersection of culture, technology, and innovation, all the stuff we're going to talk about today. Yeah. His writing has been featured and published in outlets including the Technology and Society magazine, Scientific American, and USA Today. And he's been on Fox Business, Marketplace, and other talk radio and podcasts. He has extensive experience working with state-based technology policy projects with most major federal technology policy topics. Previously, he was the Director of Technology and Innovation at Stand Together Trust and Stand Together. He was also the Government Affairs Manager at the Competitive Enterprise Institute and the Assistant Director of Outreach for Technology Policy at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. All good stuff. He is originally from the Southern California. We won't hold that against him. And a graduate of Taylor University in Indiana. It's kind of interesting. Taylor with the Taylor University. That's cool. It is. Man. Nice. With a double major in history and political science. He and his family live in the Washington, D.C. area. And for links to his professional and personal writings, you can visit www.taylorbarkley.com. So with all that said, Taylor, let's get right into it. The first question is, why do you do what you do every day?
Man, I love it. I mean, that's the first reason. But I think I'm motivated I think it's important. I think the world I work in, public policy, appreciate you going through the bio. I mean, it's been over a decade now that I've been doing this. And I think what gets me out of the bed, I'm out of bed in the morning, is I'm persuaded that public policy can have a huge impact on people's, everyday well-being, their prosperity, if you will. And that's been made abundantly clear to me in the technology and innovation policy space. So one example, there's a couple of stark examples. So, the internet that, we are taking advantage of right now is an amazingly beneficial tool that was basically, as my former colleague and friend Adam Thier says, it was born free. So the internet was not born into a public policy environment that said you need to have a license before you start a website. You need to make sure you file these papers before you engage in social media, for example. It was actually, the internet was developed as a government project and then was only made what it is today because it was released into, the commercial world, the private world. And on the other side, there are innovations and technologies that are born into captivity. I think anyone who tries to start a TV station right now that's broadcast over the air is born into a maze of video regulations at the Federal Communications Commission. And healthcare is, of course, rife with, new ideas are born into captivity. And I will say, there's reasons for that, many of them good, right? I think it's good that drugs have an approval process, but there can be a downside as well. And, economist Alex Tabarrok talks about the invisible graveyard of FDA approval processes. The fact that things take so long to be approved means that people aren't getting treatments that could actually help them or save their lives. So then and I've even put health in kind of the innovation world. And that's another reason I get out of bed is just our lives have so dramatically improved because of technology and innovation. The life I live would be unobtainable for any amount of money to any emperor who's lived throughout most of human history. And that's because of tech and innovation.
Yeah. All right, that's awesome, man. I love all the work that you're doing and continue to do. And I mean, you've seen a lot of it as well, kind of with your own family and some of the challenges that y'all had over the last few years. And, I don't know how much you want to share about that, but I know that you have had some of that and you've seen kind of God's grace through those situations. And
absolutely,
man, just think about where you and Rachel's lives would be had we not had this technology and innovation, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you were very public about the story,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the short version, my wife had a tumor in her spinal cord, a cancerous tumor in her spinal cord that, if she, so it probably wouldn't have been discovered even, 20 years ago, maybe, but 50 years ago, 100 years ago, absolutely not. She just would have died a slow, agonizing, and painful death.
Man.
And we wouldn't have known why.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing to think now there was a technology to discover it, and there were doctors who were in cutting edge of research to remove it, and then recovery and physical therapy programs and medicines and whole structure to enable her to live a normal life. She's in a
Yeah.
wheelchair most of the time, but it's
Yeah.
thanks to technology and innovation that she can do that. And like finally, when we were in the midst of like the darkest points, it was social media
Yeah.
and the internet and connectivity that allowed us to, gosh, get so much help from our network scattered around the globe. I
Yeah.
mean, people leading prayers in Ukraine or in India, all around the US, that just would have been unheard of. Even, I don't know, would have
Yeah.
been difficult to do 20 years ago, but doable, 30 years ago, much,
Yeah.
much more difficult. So
It,
we think about that often.
and Taylor, what's interesting about that too, right? Is that that was right after you had your first baby.
Yeah, true.
And
Yep.
during that whole
Yep.
process, and
Yep.
now I remember praying for y'all a lot throughout that
Oh,
whole
thanks,
process
Vance.
as well and everything. And but it's interesting, even with kids, I've got 3 kids now, and seeing, how much things have changed from the technology of being
Yeah.
in there, what they can do and everything else. There's so much going on that people, I don't know that we have the credit for technology of how much it's really improved our life.
Hmm.
The standard of living
Right.
has just dramatically changed. And I know we had talked a little bit about going through some stuff, but we're going to talk about some age verification and social
Yes.
media and all that. But
Yes.
I wonder, given where we started here, may actually talk more about your work on abundance, and then we can move
Sure.
into that. The technology space is just a huge part of the abundance, and so like as you know, my Let People Prosper, I feel like it's God's calling for my life and is what I've been
Yeah.
doing, and get a PhD
Yeah.
in economics and work in public policy, and doing all this stuff. And I really feel like the prosperity isn't just material things. It's
Mm. Agreed.
psychological, spiritual, intellectual. I mean, it's really about you doing you. And
Mhm.
ultimately, I feel like that's a lot with God's grace and where the direction are of your job that you're going to have and things of that nature. But there's so
Mhm.
much that goes into that, because we feel with abundant resources to do things. But I wonder kind of what your thinking is whenever you're thinking about abundance and your research.
That's a driving vision for what we do at the Center for Growth and Opportunity.
Hmm.
So I work on our tech and innovation portfolio, but we also do research, economic policy research, and immigration and energy as well. And I mean, tying all those together, those are, I think, some of the core components of having, an abundant and prosperous future. So, we were just discussing a paper I'd co-authored with my colleagues in energy and immigration on what policies promote abundance. And there, we published this last year, about a
Yeah.
year ago, and we'll probably update it in the next, year or so, because it's always changing. But there, we thought through, like, if I were sitting across from, the president of the United States, a chief regulator at one of the agencies, a member of Congress, what would we tell them are like the key policies to change in order for America to realize a more abundant future? And with abundance is this word that everyone probably has a different definition. Sometimes I'll tell this to people who aren't in the policy world, and they just look at me like, "What are you talking about?" And abundance is many concepts, but it's I think my energy colleagues capture it well, and immigration too. Like, I love our immigration tagline: "People bring prosperity." People bring ideas, they bring energy and ingenuity, and how many tech companies are led by immigrants? I think what Google and Microsoft,
Yeah.
Indian immigrants. It's amazing. These are the largest companies in the world, and they're based in America, and with an open immigration policy. And in the paper, we outline key, policy proposals to open America to more people. And energy, I love the slogan. It was actually coined by, I think, by the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission, an old
Hmm.
something that was folded in the Department of Energy. The vision of having energy that's too cheap to meter. So
There you go.
imagine we
Yeah.
paid an energy bill like a broadband bill
Yeah.
without data caps. We just like, well, now I pay $50 a month for unlimited data. Like,
Yeah.
imagine paying $50 a month for unlimited energy. And
Mm.
imagine too, not just energy that's wood fired, coal fired, but like
Yeah.
renewable, clean, and like nuclear is before us.
Yeah.
There's another policy decision that we've made of, you
Hmm.
know, an abundance of caution. No new nuclear plants have really been open lately, and that's we could be through the roof in energy production, and energy is linked to so many of our daily activities. And
Yeah.
you're probably sitting in an air conditioned room in a very hot place right now.
Yes.
I am sitting in an air conditioned room in a very hot place, and
Yeah.
it would just be wildly different. Here we are using a computer with high definition video, all this stuff, and it's made possible by energy, and we can boost that through policy decisions. And with
Yeah.
tech and innovation, I think in as many ways we're living in an abundant future, right? I think the amount of information available to anyone with a smartphone, which is I think half the global population, or we're talking 3.5 billion people. The entertainment options. I mean, Rachel and I, my wife and I, we sit down and want to watch some TV, and it's like we have to run through this list of like, instead of just a few channels, or 200 years ago, entertainment wasn't much of a thing because there wasn't electric lights, so you just go to bed when the sun goes down, unless you want to like squint and read by candlelight. Now it's like for pennies, we're getting world-class entertainment at any moment of the day, and it's more than we even know what to do with. So I think there's still like policy decisions and making broadband connectivity cheaper, healthcare innovations more available and faster that we can achieve through policy choices.
Yeah. No, that's good, Taylor. And I think it goes through like the recommendations, and I'll put all these at the show notes page at vanceginn.substack.com, or vanceginn.com is the easier way to get there. But it's encouraging competitive tech markets, improving the FDA approval process, speeding up clean energy development, enabling secure and affordable access to electricity, boosting entrepreneurship and innovation through immigration, and building a better pathway for skilled immigration. I mean, I think all those are key, getting at some of the fundamental issues that we face every day, whether it be in the healthcare, with FDA holding back and patents and all these things of, how many more solutions, how many more people would be healed, not just by God, but through some of these innovations that take place. Had the FDA process not be so long.
Well, that's an important thought process, Vance. And I even forget to do it. Like I have a colleague who reminds me, is like if we talk about abundance in certain ways, we can leave, I think, like almost a sci-fi vision of the future on the table. So it's thinking about like, what could we actually do now with the ideas we have, or even the current technologies we have, if we make certain public policy choices that can clear away the pathway for entrepreneurs, for the market to, I think, fulfill that. And people can like bristle and say like, well, why do we need a world with $200,000 per capita GDP? Like that's too much money. But it's like, well, think about all that could afford. It's better healthcare. It's better housing. It's better education opportunities. That should be the norm. And there's all sorts of charts, and you're an economist and can do better than I. But just like kind of seeing if we made these certain tweaks in like growth, total factor productivity growth rates, for instance, like decisions 20 years ago, we'd be like way up here in terms of wealth and income and opportunity. That's for everyone. It's not just for the elites. It's not just for the high income earners. It's for everyone. It's bringing up the whole economy, and I think that's part of the abundance vision as well.
Yeah, no, that's good, Taylor. And I think it's something else that I think about as an economist. You mentioned that it's not just abundance for the upper income. It's not just abundance for the middle class. And in fact, a lot of the reasons why I got into economics was to help the poor, to help the neediest among us. And when you have more abundance, they're the ones that are going to benefit the most at the end of the day, because they're also improving. And there's talks about inequality, and it's measured differently. And there are some efforts out there that actually show that, there's not that much inequality as much anymore as what there used to be, depending on how you measure it, and you take account of all earnings that are being paid and everything else. And I kind of think there's a little bit too much concern about inequality. As long as the upper income and lower incomes are both moving up, we're all improving. We're doing better over time, because ultimately the solution that some people come up with is more government. We need to have inequality. We need to have higher taxes and redistribute the income and have government come in. At the same time, they're shrinking the pie. I want to see the pie get bigger so that everyone can flourish more. And that's what it goes back to these key points, which I really like that you have here, is about technology. And that technology is going to help us in so many ways. I mean, if you think about, you're saying 200 years ago, or even 100 years ago, the technologies are so much different now that we can get in a car and basically know that it's going to work for the most part, as long as you're keeping up with it and everything. We've got running water anytime that we want. I mean, there's some things that are just so fundamental and that we just take for granted every day that some places still don't have that access to that. And I think that's another thing that's abundant, is that we can't, and Taylor, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is that sometimes right now, it seems like we're so focused on America, which is important. We live in America. I want America to flourish, but we're not the only humans living on this globe.
Right.
Earth, right? That there are people in a lot of other countries that aren't living in abundance yet. And we've got to make sure we don't lose sight of them. But I wonder what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, that is important. So, my organization, most of my thought, I know the American context, but like it
Yeah.
really is global. And I think having a global perspective is important. And we were seeing more and more people brought out of poverty. Like, there's foundations that track these numbers about how many people are living on $2 a day or less. And I mean,
Yeah.
that is just a decreasing number of people, which is just fantastic to see. And, while you were talking, I was actually looking up our recent poll. We do this poll
Yeah.
once a year on abundance, actually.
Okay.
And we call it our abundance poll. So if you just, Google abundance poll CGO, it'll come up. And we asked our question each year on when should someone be born to have a thriving and fulfilling life? And you and I have been talking about history here, right? Like 100 years ago, 200 years ago. So we asked, 200 years ago, right now, or 200 years in the future, where it'd be better to be born to have a thriving, fulfilling life. And actually, I'm always surprised that like each year, more people say that 200 years ago would be better to be born than even in the
Wow.
future. Most people say if there's like a dominant answer of those three, it's right now. But then 42% and 41% said not sure.
Hmm.
And I just find that fascinating. Like people, this is a whole suite of podcasts, like why there's that thinking. But being a history major, you mentioned that at the top. I think about that all the time. That's another thing, every day. Just the difference in my life between that of my ancestors. Most people stayed put geographically. 40% of children died. I think even 50% of children died before reaching the age of 4.
Hmm.
Just think of like that massive amount of loss of life.
Yeah.
So even like pre-contraception, right? Like you and I, if we if we're alive to our age now,
Yeah.
not killed by disease or in childhood, probably would have had a spouse die of childbirth, if not disease. We would have multiple children die from malnutrition, disease, and that was just the norm.
Yeah.
Darkness was the norm. Having lack of education, having tyrannical governments, dominant war, the amount of war and violence, and Steven Pinker has written about this extensively and how the world is getting less violent. And I just think, how are we in this place, like our poll found, where fewer people think it's better to live in the future than 200 years ago when, if you're a woman, you didn't have voting rights.
Yeah.
If you could even lived in a country that had votes, an electoral process, property wasn't available to most women, minorities. It just kind of boggles the mind how much it's improved. And that's for multiple reasons. But I think technology has been at the core of that, like growth in the economy. And Deirdre McCloskey talks about the hockey stick graph, right? Like I think it's what was it, GDP per capita?
Yeah, that's right.
If I recall correctly. It's just for most of human history, it's flat, but then you hit like late 1700s and it goes whoop like a hockey stick. So anyway, I think tech is at the core of that.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and there's so much to that. Energy, oil and gas, like you were saying earlier, was a big part of that, fueling that technology and everything else that was going on. Also, a lot of my work is on institutions, and so I would also say that moving more towards capitalism, like free markets and limiting government, that helped to unleash that entrepreneurial spirit. You know what I mean? Of what's all going on and the new technologies that can come out because they weren't stifled. There were more opportunities, and also to be able to have that private property to gain the profits and also losses.
Yeah.
I've been trying to talk about this more and more in my podcast, is that we've got to be okay with like failure. Too many people just want us not to fail at all. And I don't know about you, Taylor, but I failed a lot, and that's how I learned.
I have.
And throughout that process, the innovation process, there's a lot of success and failure. And that's what socialism, I think, and communism and other types of government or economic institutions, they try to weed that out, but at the cost of more abundance.
Right.
Flourishing, because that breeds mediocrity, because now there's no incentive to do any of that.
Yeah. And like, and I know, like, failing sucks. Like it hurts. It's painful. And I think so those policies are often motivated from that.
Yes.
I think good place of like, let's help alleviate the pain, right? Let's get as much of the pain out of the process. And I think it's good, but you're right. Like in the long run or medium run, even the short term, it can backfire and it doesn't actually help.
No. All right. Well, that was a lot of good stuff on abundance. And I really want to move into this new poll you have that's out and talk about that with dealing with social media and tech companies and how people are thinking about those now.
Yeah, so we at the CGO, we love polling. We partner with YouGov for all our polls, and they're a really great firm. So we have that abundance poll. We've done that twice. We do that annually, and that can be found on our website. But this next poll that's will have been released when this podcast releases, we've been doing it since July of 2020, and we've had how many now? Six polls. So there's nice longitudinal data, as the term is. on some questions that we've asked over time, and the main one being Americans' trust towards companies. So I think the specific question is like, how much do you trust, the companies below with keep your data secure or something like that. So we've asked that repeatedly for about Google, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, TikTok, Zoom, Twitter, and the government, federal, state, and local. And what I've found fascinating is that trust in this new poll has gone up again. We saw it trust increase for all the tech companies, at least, except for TikTok. TikTok is the one, let's see here, where it has declined again. I'm looking at the numbers here, fresh, hot off the press. Our last poll was January 2023, and then our most recent one was August 2023. TikTok declined in trust by 3 points, but Google went up by 2. August, so this is like January to August. August data up 2 points, Amazon down 1, Microsoft up 1, and then the government data is interesting. Federal government's about the same, state as well, and local. And of course, like this poll was conducted, July 2020, and through most of the polls through COVID, and I think that has something to do with levels of trust, right? How could it not? But we've also, included some new questions about, so that was the January poll. We include questions about, we'll talk about this later in the show, levels of trust for platforms to be safe for children to use.
Yeah.
And there I was just looking at this data, for the first time. Let's see, trust has gone down for Facebook by 1 point. Amazon's the same. It's the highest actually of all the tech companies at 44% levels of trust. Instagram is down in August by 3 points, Snapchat as well. So I think, it's interesting. This discussion about, safety for kids online is obviously having an effect on people's belief and levels of trust for platforms to be safe for kids to use. We also have some questions. It looks like a colleague is actually working on this document right now. So it's being
Nice.
Updated.
Yes.
Questions about AI. And this is actually in our most recent abundance poll, which, I do know off the top of my head. We asked in that poll how worried people are about AI displacing jobs generally and then displacing their own job. And when we asked it generally, it was about 70% of the population was worried to somewhat worried. But when we asked about their own job, it was only about 30% of the population that was worried or somewhat worried. And I think this is in polling, it's called the third party effect, where, you think something is a bigger deal and a bigger problem for other people, but not so much for yourself. And that really captured it. And I actually wrote about this in a Fox News op-ed, that finding in particular. And I think it goes to, when we talk about these notions of AI, artificial intelligence, in a general way, it can become big, scary, and have a huge impact. But then when we think about our own lives and maybe how it could potentially even like do the job I'm doing, for instance, like an AI tool, there it can be like, well, wait a minute, like I know like all the particularities that go into my work, and they can maybe become like less of a possibility. So in this poll, and all these polls, we put the full data set and charts and like kind of top line findings on our website. And so people can really dive in there. But we've been, it's been fascinating to see over the last, 3 years now, 3.5 years or so, those levels of trust kind of going like this, and then even like increasing, and now like, increasing a little bit for some and decreasing for others.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's fascinating. And thank you for sharing that. And it'll be great. And I'll put a link in the show notes page to this as well.
Great. Yeah, we'll have the fresh charts there to kind of highlight these. So it really pops visually.
Yeah, that'll be great, because it is fascinating though, because of the trust, distrust. We've seen a lot of government influence or the attempts to put more government influence with social media, age verification, especially for minors, between the ages of 13 to 18. And there's different ones that are out there. And, I was looking at, and I also know that at least with previous polls, y'all have looked at, would you share your ID to access social media? And I don't know what the latest one is, but the last one that y'all did that came out said that for sharing mine, completely disagree, was 41%.
Yep.
Sharing child's was 54%. And if you add in somewhat disagree, that's another 14%. So that's 68%, nearly 70% of people saying, you know what, I don't really want to share my child's stuff. But that's exactly what's happening. A bill passed in Texas, where I live I live near Austin, Texas. And so there was a bill passed here that you're basically going to have to provide your information online. Other states like Utah, is kind of the Utah model, I guess, is age verification is this next thing. And I think it goes into what all you're saying there about trust. Who do you trust? Who do you not? And Taylor, to be frank with you, like I'm more distrustful of government. I don't want government to be telling me as a parent what to do, but that kind of seems like where there's some disagreement about what the next steps are. So I wonder how do you talk about it though? How do you think about this?
It's a big, complex issue, and yeah, I'm glad you brought up the polling. Like it remains unpopular in our new data as well.
Okay.
This I think it's motivated from a good place. The internet is not an entirely safe place, especially
Yeah.
for adults, for children. Like I was reading, this is like somewhat internet, but like $330 million has been reported lost to the Federal Trade Commission on text scams. And, we're all familiar with email scams and the amount of spam, pornography use, child sexual abuse material. I mean, it's especially with CSAM is the acronym for child sexual abuse material. And, I want to be cognizant of maybe young ears listening and general listenership, because it gets very vile very fast. So like that's one component. And when we talk about age verification, there are a few debates happening right now, and there's the states have passed laws requiring age verification for access to pornographic websites. And so some porn sites have pulled out of states, have left states, because it's just not conducive to running their business. So these laws require submission. I think it's a government ID even, for basically to prohibit minors from accessing it. So in order for this is across, no matter what happens on the internet, in order for firms to comply with age verification laws, they need to know the age of all their users. So this isn't something that just impacts minors. If the law is written to protect minors, it impacts every user. So this is happening right now with pornographic websites. And that's one, I think, distinct set of issues that have its own free speech implications, because with age verification, you have the government saying you need to submit identification before you participate in your speech. And that has severe First Amendment implications, rightly so.
Yeah.
I think it's a different question when it comes to pornographic websites versus what's been happening in all these other states with social media websites. So yeah, you mentioned a Texas law passed. Arkansas has passed a bill. Utah, where the Center for Growth and Opportunity is based, passed a law. That the Utah bill, and they're all a little bit different, but most have been requiring parental consent before a minor under the age of usually 16 or 17 can sign up for a social media site. There, the same thing applies, and I think I mentioned the issues of dangers on the internet with scams, crime, pornography, child sexual abuse material. But then there's also this other dimension that I think comes into play with these social media sites, mental health impact. So, whenever I discuss with someone these social media safety bills, it's like, what problem are we trying to solve? I think that's really, really important to the discussion, and can really influence the policy solutions that are set about. And I think there's I'm just going to say universal agreement that stopping CSAM is an important priority. Tech companies are on board with that. And I wrote a paper in January on how policymakers can keep minors safe online. And in my approach, I think it's best to triage these problems where there's a clear harm and a clear solution. And I think that child sexual abuse material falls into that category. Absolutely. We know what the problem is, and then we have solutions to deal with it. It's illegal. No site can legally host that content.
Yeah.
People will, I think, incorrectly bring up Section 230 as a way out of it, but that's not correct. Section 230 actually, prohibits. It does not protect federal crimes, federal criminal content. That is what that is. And then there's like another category of, and a clear solution there, I think, is providing law enforcement with resources it needs to combat it. It's at the federal, state, local level. And there's actually a bill introduced last Congress, I think will be reintroduced soon, bipartisan bill in all likelihood, that would provide, I think, $4 billion for federal law enforcement to deal with this issue. Because over and over and over, it's just they are under-equipped to deal with the complexity of these cases. So that's kind of the first problem. Another problem is with, I would say, middling. Like, what is the problem? Like, we're not quite sure what the problem is, and we're not quite sure what the solution is. But issues of privacy for kids online. I think this is something that I want to work to solve as a policy researcher. And I think, throw this out there for the world. It's, in an American context, we fall into this, if you're someone who's under 13, you fall into a set of regulations that are very restrictive. So there's this set of regulations that the Federal Trade Commission oversees that basically requires parental consent if companies are going to gather data on users under the age of 13. What essentially that means is that there aren't websites designed for users under the age of 13 because it's so expensive. So it's like you either fall into that world or you're treated like a 45-year-old adult.
Yeah.
And I think there's like room there to like really, and it's tough because with the internet, you're dealing with issues of speech, you're dealing with a huge economic growth driver in the American and global economy. So you want to be very careful about not killing that innovation, and you also want to be careful about not abridging people's rights to free speech. So like, what is that the problem out there for you all to solve, all your listeners to solve, is like, what is the balanced privacy policy for users, for minors, age say 13 to 18? And like the third category of issues which I write about, and that's the kind of triage effect, is I think maybe the more popular, it's often discussed in the media, is impacts of mental health on teens and social media use. Jonathan Haidt, famous researcher, is out there saying that there is a clear causal link. I think he aims particularly at teen girls, between rates of social media use and negative mental health. So, a causal link, not just correlational. I mean, we can nerd out about the differences, but I think it's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Where there's reams of studies, everyone coming out, here and there. Seems like every week there's some new study that's released, purporting to make the connection one way or the other. And most recently, there's a very significant study came out from Oxford, looking at Facebook user data from 2008 to 2019 of nearly 1 million people in 72 countries around the world, coupled with Gallup's, I think, World Poll, where they're asking people like, how'd you feel today? Like, were you insulted? It goes through like kind of qualitative findings. And these researchers looked at Facebook use and those findings, and then found basically no effect in negative well-being, which kind of bucks the Jonathan Haidt thesis that there is a at least correlational link, if not causal link, between social media use and negative mental health. And I think that popular discussion has led to all sorts of things. But policymakers saw that, and they introduced these bills in Utah and Arkansas and Texas, and I think we'll see it in more states. And either some federal efforts to either ban social media use or restrict it for minors based on those, I think, very tenuous findings. That overlaid in this is a history of humanity's tendency to have moral panics about new technologies. And there's a fascinating and fun Twitter account, or I guess X account now, called Pessimist Archive, and they pull out newspaper articles reacting to, and they're a website as well. I think if you go to pessimistarchive.org, you can find interactive articles, and organized by technology, the radio, novels, teddy bears, automobile, airplanes, on and on and on. There were concerns about comic books, creating mental health issues in children. Novels were, a vast concern. And novels weren't really a thing until the late 1700s. We kind of take it for granted today, and another benefit of technology. But people, were actually fearful, and you can read their words in newspaper clippings about their concerns that, like, okay, if teenage boys are spending all this time in fanciful universes, that's going to make them criminals. It's going to make them delinquents. They're not going to be in the real world. And it's funny. It's like, oh wow, you plop that into social media debate today. It's very similar, and I think that's just something to be cognizant of.
Video games were another one for a long time.
Yes, and that debate is pretty much. I mean, there were congressional hearings on violence in video games in the early 1990s, and it led to some, I think, good solutions. But now I think it was the American Psychological Association that actually changed its position, where 10 years ago their position was there is a correlation between violent video games, violent behavior, and now they've said actually the more research has been done, there's not a link. And this is another kind of like interesting thing with these debates. Is like, we're still so new, we're still figuring it out. The social media platform of today is not going to be the one of even like a year from now, for all we know. And there were concerns about MySpace. When now it's like, what are you talking about for most young users?
You boomer, what's going on?
So I don't say this to like discount the concerns of legislators or well-meaning advocates. It's just like, to me it's really important to like, okay, if I'm encountering new technology, like this is the default human position to kind of fear the new. I think it's kind of how we're wired, for good or for ill, and it's a tendency just to be aware of.
All great points. Thank you for laying that out so well, Taylor. I think you hit on all the key things. And I mean, it always goes back to, in one view, from what Milton Friedman said, right? Don't judge a policy by its intentions. Because I think you're right that there's a lot of good intentions with these types of policies and the discussion and everything else. You got to judge them by their results. And what I'm really concerned about are those results, because we are going to see a lot of the seen, but we're not going to see the unseen. One of the things about with the age verification and trying to get minors off of the internet and social media and everything else is we've also got to think about the unseen, the unintended consequences, what we call opportunity costs in economics.
Yeah.
Is what are these individuals that are on social media, and whether or not that's contributing to their health issues, which I think there's a lot more involved than just social media. It just happens to be what they want to blame it on today instead of like video games or something else in the past. But what else are they going to be doing? Are those kids going to get off social media and then go commit more crime because they're out and about, not at home on their social media? Are they going out and having unprotected sex, and so there's more babies? There's a lot of
those numbers are down, by the way.
Yeah.
Maybe because of that.
Yeah, and so there's unintended consequences here that I just don't think that we have enough information to know about, and we're trying to cut off this innovation that could take place, because this also means that we're going to start kids off at a younger age and probably not getting on these websites, social media, or just the internet in general, because you're like, I'm just going to ban you from that. And then they're not going to learn and have these skill sets over time to, for one thing, do it for themselves and overcome obstacles, because that's ultimately why we're raising our kids, so they can think on their own. But we're saying, we can't let you think about that. And also we're getting in the middle of parenting, where just like with school choice, I'm for school choice because I think parents know best.
Yes.
Now, every parent may not do exactly what we'd want them to do, but they're going to do what's in their best interest at that time. And I think that the same thing is true with social media, that the parent should be the one that's going to be in control of this. And the social media companies have put in a lot of tools, filter tools, and everything else that I use for my kids.
Oh, great.
And I think that those have been really helpful. And by the way, you could say no, like, just don't let them play on this. If this is really what we want to do, is that the consumer, the parents have a lot more control. And so handing that over, these rights to government and politicians who have a lot of issues, this just seems like a recipe for a big problem in the future. But I wonder kind of what are your kind of responses to some of that?
Oh man, yeah. I mean, so much good stuff there, Vance. A couple things to react to. One thing with the legislators and advocates of these bills at the state level, federal level, will say was the teen and social media context is, parents are overwhelmed and they don't know what to do. So we need the state to get involved. And another thing they often bring up at the same time is, you'd mentioned, just don't let them use devices. I've heard, in interviews and other parents in real world say, well, it's like, well, what do you do when 29, 30 of their friends have Snapchat and a smartphone? Like, if your kid is all of a sudden the only one without it, like, that can leave them out of what's happening on the weekend, a community. Because that's like a positive side of social media. It's a community, and especially for marginalized youth, LGBTQ population who are suffering, it's often an outlet in a community that they wouldn't have in maybe like a physical or geographical context. And I think, we talked about, the poor among us, like keeping that in mind in this context, and maybe not in a material sense, but maybe in like a viewpoint sense. And another assumption here that I think is, often at play is, when parents involved. So like, the Utah bill, I think, is written poorly in that it requires parental consent, but it offers no guidance on like, how do you verify this person sending an email or letter or whatever is actually the parent? So many kids don't even have parents. They have caregivers. And I think that's important to talk about in this context. It's not just parents. It's not, two parent home that's, in a suburb and everything's hunky dory. It's, so many kids, unfortunately and sadly, and I think that's why it's important to focus on abundance, are growing up in contexts where they're being raised by a grandparent or another family member or in the foster system or, even worse. And I think we need to think about policies that would impact those populations. Yeah, and I think that's what's missed here with these laws. They're overly broad, and I think assume a lot of things and won't end up helping the populations that they're intended to help. And I'll say about you mentioned the solutions from tech companies. I think it's okay, and we should critique tech companies for being way too slow on the draw here. I think they really missed an opportunity. I've been in tech policy for over 10 years now, and I would talk with friends and family, and they would have no idea that Google, YouTube, Facebook at the time, Instagram had all these parental tools. And there's a whole organization. Organizations out there for it. They have no idea they exist.
Man. I was good. One thing I'm going to put in the show notes page is another great link here you have is key resources for parents, the CGO social media toolkit. It talks about nonprofit orgs that are in this, social media like Google Families, YouTube Kids, Meta's Education Hub, TikTok Safety Center, some of those groups like the Family Online Safety Institute, Common Sense Media, Connect Safe. But anyway, I was going to put a link to that as well, because you're right. There are so many resources out there. I think a big part of this is education and getting this information out there. I know there's some discussion about having even social media or internet discussion classes, K through 12. I think we have to be careful about how they're going to teach some of that, because given what's in a lot of the government schools, public schools out there. But I think that to me, that's more heading in the right direction of getting people educated about it, because this goes to abundance as well. The more education we've had, the more abundant that we've been able to be, and we've been able to let people prosper overall. So as we're wrapping up here, it's been a great conversation. What would you like to leave us with? Maybe some optimism, some pessimism, or what else would you like to leave us with?
Oh man, I think, with the right cultural outlook and attitude, with the right, I think, public policies, I think we and our children and their kids can see a future that would, I think, look unfamiliar even to us, and in a good way, right? Of, cures for diseases that we just take for granted as uncurable today, for access to, the amount of food that we see and have access to now, even for low income populations, is just astounding. And I think that can continually improve, I think, with the right attitude and policy decisions. And I think just history demonstrates there's reason to be optimistic. I mean, we're in an amazing time to be alive. And I think with the choices we make today in the policy and cultural context, we can see an even better future. And I think history backs that up.
I agree. I'm thankful for all the work that you're doing, and God bless you, Taylor, and your family.
Oh, thank you, Vance. Likewise.
Thanks. And thank you so much. And it's glad to have you on, and we'll keep this conversation going. And for the audience, if you enjoyed this, please leave us a 5-star rating. Go find this out on all the podcast outlets and share it with your friends and family, so we can spread this information. It's really important about our future, and it's the abundance and the prosperity and online technology, all that good stuff. We got a lot more to do. So until next time, let people prosper.